The parchment was sealed with blood. A private order from the English crown. No scribe was allowed to copy it. No priest dared whisper its contents. It was not justice. It was ritual. A method of execution designed not only to kill a man, but to erase his very defiance from memory. William Wallace was not simply sentenced to death. He was chosen. Chosen to serve as a warning. Not just to Scots, but to every man who might dare look power in the eye and say, no. They dragged him naked through the streets of London, tied to a horse, body broken from the 400-mile ride, skin torn by stone, eyes swollen shut from fists and chains, but his spirit? It terrified them. Even in chains, he defied them. So they made a decision: he would not die a quick death. His body would be broken like a holy offering. His genitals severed. His insides removed, alive. They would burn his entrails before his eyes. Then his limbs, hacked and scattered to the four corners of Britain. This wasn't execution. This was state-sanctioned sorcery, designed to break not just flesh, but legacy. And yet, it didn't work. Because you're still hearing his name. You're still here. Listening. That means something in you refuses to forget. Refuses to bow. And that makes you dangerous. So listen carefully. What you're about to hear is not the story told in schools. This is not Braveheart. This is not a fable of good versus evil. This is the true anatomy of power, how empire crushes resistance, how institutions distort memory, and how one man became a threat so severe, so symbolic, they tried to erase him from time itself. This is the execution of William Wallace. But more than that. This is the anatomy of control. And if you keep watching, I promise you, by the time this ends, you will never look at justice, or obedience, the same way again. Because this isn't just history. This is the weaponization of fear. And it's still being used. Today, history pretends to speak, but it often lies through omission. What you were told about William Wallace was filtered through centuries of monarchs, churches, and crowns terrified of what his name represented. Not a man. Not even a rebellion. But a fracture in the illusion. The illusion that power is permanent. That thrones are sacred. That kings are gods in robes. But the boy born in the hills of Elderslie wasn't raised by kings. He was raised by silence. After the death of Scotland's rightful king, Alexander III, Wallace grew up in a land ruled by ghosts, ghosts of a nation too scared to fight, too noble to beg, and too fractured to unite. England knew this. Edward Longshanks, the towering king of England, was not just a monarch. He was a master of psychological warfare. He didn't invade Scotland like a brute. No. He infiltrated it like a virus. Offering arbitration. Brotherhood. Stability. Promises of unity. Promises always precede betrayal. The nobles accepted him. They bowed. They signed the ragman roll, thousands of them. They sold Scotland's soul for safety. But safety is a leash. And Wallace would not wear it. You must understand something. Wallace did not begin as a leader. He began as a witness. He watched as English sheriffs executed farmers without trial. He watched his own family stripped of dignity, property, and freedom. And then, he snapped. He didn't make speeches. He didn't ask permission. He killed. He struck down an English sheriff named Heselrig, and it wasn't just revenge, it was prophecy. With that act, he crossed a threshold from man to myth. He lit a match in a land soaked in gasoline. And Scotland, once silent, caught fire. This isn't the story of a lone hero. This is the story of what happens when one man refuses to die quietly. When one man turns his pain into purpose. When silence breaks. Empires fear that. And so they made a plan. They would not kill Wallace like a man. They would kill him like a symbol. And they would do it in a way that speaks across centuries, like a scar etched into time. They succeeded, in the short term. But here you are. Still listening. So tell me, who really won? What separates a kingdom from a cult? Is it robes and gold? Is it the architecture of power? Or is it obedience, perfect, passive obedience from millions who've forgotten they're enslaved? Edward Longshanks understood something most kings did not: you don't conquer a people by killing them. You conquer them by convincing them they're already defeated. The English occupation of Scotland wasn't just military, it was psychological. Every law passed, every tax levied, every land grant to an English noble wasn't just policy. It was a whisper: you belong to us. And the tragedy is, most Scots believed it. They went along. The nobles kissed the king's ring. The church kept quiet. The merchants traded in silver soaked with blood. And slowly, Scotland forgot what resistance even felt like. But Wallace remembered. And because he remembered, he became a threat. You see, resistance isn't always violent. It's contagious. The moment one man stands, others remember they have legs. Wallace's victories, like the one at Stirling Bridge, weren't just military upsets. They were psychological cracks in the mask of English invincibility. He didn't just defeat an army, he exposed a lie. He showed that the empire bled. So Edward did what all empires do when the spell begins to break. He called for an example. They needed Wallace not just dead, but unbelieved. His courage had to be rewritten as treason. His conviction reframed as madness. His legacy sterilized with horror so that no one would dare follow. But to truly erase a symbol, you must kill it with ceremony. With spectacle. And that is exactly what they prepared. The Tower of London wasn't just a prison. It was a temple of obedience. And Wallace, broken, betrayed, alone, was marched through its gates like an offering. You're beginning to understand now, aren't you? Justice, in the hands of power, is theater. It's a stage designed to condition you. To teach you where the lines are, and what happens when you cross them. But here's the truth they never wanted revealed: the spectacle of Wallace's death wasn't meant to punish him. It was meant to program you. To terrify you into silence. To make you forget your power. To make you obedient. And it worked, for a while that you've been told executions are punishment. But what if I told you their performance? What if I told you that what happened to William Wallace on August 23, 1305, wasn't just death, it was a ritual? Understand this: empires don't waste time on the unknown. They crush symbols. They crucify meaning. They take men like Wallace, men who represent resistance, defiance, awakening, and they sacrifice them, not in the dark, but under sunlight, before a howling crowd. Because it's not about killing one man. It's about telling every man watching, you are nothing. London turned out in droves that day. Merchants abandoned their stalls. Nobles descended from their chambers. Beggars elbowed for front-row seats. But none of them were there for justice. They came to see what happens when a man refuses to kneel. They came to feel safe again, safe in their obedience. Safe knowing that even the strongest among them can be broken by the crown. Wallace was dragged naked through the streets, tied to a wooden hurdle pulled behind a horse. His back shredded, his skin torn. The wounds weren't random. They were messages. Each one carved by the road itself. A body lettered in pain, so that every cobblestone he crossed became part of the script: this is what defiance costs. Then came the final act. At Smithfield, they tied him to a wooden frame. Still breathing. Still conscious. They hanged him, but only until he lost breath, not until he lost life. Then they revived him. Next, the blade. They castrated him. Burned his genitals before his eyes. Still alive. They sliced his stomach open. Pulled out his entrails. Burned them too. Still alive. They did not allow him to die until the ritual was complete. Finally, they beheaded him. But even that wasn't enough. His body was quartered, limbs cut from the torso and sent to the furthest corners of Britain, Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, Perth. His head? Placed on a spike atop London Bridge. This was not about execution. This was broadcast. This was how kings communicate with the masses. This was the original algorithm, before social media, before the screen. Pain as propaganda. Death as deterrence. Control through spectacle. And you. You were meant to inherit that fear. But if you're still watching, still breathing, then maybe, just maybe, you're ready to break that inheritance. What happened to Wallace wasn't unique. It was systemic. This, what you've just seen, is the Empire's blueprint. Not just in 1305. Not just in Scotland. But everywhere, across history. Different flags. Different gods. Same tactics. Same machine. Step 1, create the illusion of choice. Let people believe they are free, while you quietly control their leaders, their land, their laws. Step 2, offer safety in exchange for submission. Make obedience look like honor. Make conformity feel like survival. Step 3, identify the one who won't bow. Isolate him. Label him dangerous. Call him a traitor. A rebel. A madman. Doesn't matter which, just keep the herd afraid to follow. Step 4, turn his execution into a spectacle. Not to remove him, but to redefine him. To burn his face into the collective memory as a warning, not a symbol. That's the formula. And it didn't die with the Middle Ages. It evolved. Today, the scaffold is digital. The quartering is reputational. The execution is cancellation. But the method is unchanged. They still don't just punish defiance, they ritualize it. Think about it. Every decade, there's another Wallace. Another man who dares to speak against the system. Expose the lie. Refuse to kneel. And every time, without fail, they are paraded through the modern streets. Their pasts dragged through the dirt. Their careers burned. Their names quartered and nailed to headlines. Their memory distorted. Not because they're evil. But because they're effective. Because they make you remember who you are. What you could be. And that makes them dangerous. So let me ask you now, man to man, what part of you have they already executed? What piece of your soul did you surrender just to survive? Are you living, or complying? Because this isn't about Wallace anymore. It's about you. And if you're still listening, if your heart is pounding, if your mind is catching fire, then you're waking up. Now I need you to lock it in. Comment below, I remember who I am. Say it twice. I remember who I am. That's how you break the ritual. That's how we reclaim the blueprint. The greatest trick power ever played was making you think the enemy is one person. A king. A tyrant. A politician. A pope. No. The true enemy is a pattern, older than nations, deeper than dynasties. A virus of control passed from hand to hand, empire to empire. It wears different crowns, speaks different tongues, but always whispers the same 3 words, you are nothing. That's the root of it all. Every war, every chain, every lie, they all begin with that seed. Planted quietly. Grown over time. Watered with fear. And one day, you believe it. You forget the fire in your blood. You forget you're the heir of warriors, builders, visionaries. You forget that before they named you poor, weak, expendable, you were limitless. That's what Wallace remembered. And that's why they broke him. He wasn't just fighting the English. He was fighting the pattern. He saw it in the false nobles, the puppet councils, the treaties signed in blood and wine. He saw the people sedated by bread, divided by loyalty, ruled by fear. He saw a cage with invisible bars. And instead of accepting it, he howled. Now here's the brutal truth. The pattern didn't die with him. It adapted. Today, it looks like comfort. It looks like 9 to 5 sedation, endless scrolling, dopamine prisons. You don't feel the chains, because they're inside you. They've hacked your ambition. Traded your passion for passivity. They don't need swords anymore. They have screens. Systems. Soft cages. And the worst part? You help build them. Every time you settle. Stay silent. Obey without thought. You feed the pattern. So ask yourself, when did you stop fighting? When did you accept the illusion? Because until you see it, until you name the enemy as a pattern, not a person, you'll keep punching shadows. But once you see it, once you name it, everything changes. You become what they fear most, a man who remembers. Not just who he is, but what's been stolen from him. So don't look up at thrones for your enemy. Look within the pattern. Because that's where your war begins. The deeper you look into history, the more you realize, the executions weren't just punishments. They were rituals. Spectacles. Designed not just to kill a man, but to send a message. Take William Wallace. They didn't simply end his life. They unmade him, piece by piece, publicly, painfully, with precision. Why? Because he represented something more dangerous than swords or rebellion. He represented defiance, and defiance is contagious. So they made him an example. They dragged him through the streets. Displayed his agony. Carved up his body and scattered the pieces across the land. But here's the part they never tell you. That ritual wasn't about justice. It was programming. A dark, theatrical message: if you rise, this is your fate. And this tactic? It didn't die with the Middle Ages. It just evolved. Now they don't hang your body, they hang your reputation. They don't quarter your limbs, they fracture your identity. They don't burn you at the stake, they burn your voice, your credibility, your livelihood. Modern justice is cleaner, quieter, but the message is the same: sit down. Stay in line. Don't dream too loud. And like in Wallace's time, they've convinced the masses to cheer for their own jailers. They weaponize your neighbors. Train them to mock what they don't understand. They've built a culture where obedience is called virtue, and rebellion is rebranded as madness. But here's the raw, unfiltered truth: every time someone breaks the pattern, they're marked. Not because they're wrong. But because they're dangerously right. Because they remind others of their chains. And that reminder is poison to the system. You want proof? Look at every revolutionary, every whistleblower, every truth-teller. They don't fade peacefully. They're silenced, smeared, destroyed, ritually. It's not justice. It's not coincidence. It's control. And the only way to fight it is not just to survive it. It's to speak louder. To endure the fire, and keep walking. Because every ritual needs witnesses. And if you don't flinch, if you don't kneel, you become something else entirely: unbreakable. A myth they can't erase. A legend that whispers through time: they failed to silence me. Now ask yourself. Would you burn to wake the world? Or will you die quietly, ritual complete? At the center of that doomed orphanage stood a man, who should have never been trusted with children. He called himself Father Benedict. But records show no church ever claimed him. No parish. No baptismal logs. Not even a seminary file. He appeared in 1889 Mississippi with forged letters of assignment, and a black book stitched in human skin. Locals said he spoke with a strange accent, European, but not quite. And when night fell, the whispers began. Nuns reported hearing him chanting in Latin in his quarters, though none of them understood the words. One nurse claimed she saw him writing on the walls with chalk made from crushed teeth. He denied it, of course. Said it was stress. Said the orphans made things up. But then the nightmares started, in the children. Each child, without exception, reported the same dream, a man with no face. Standing in the fire. Holding out his hand. They'd wake up screaming. Sometimes speaking in languages they never learned. Some stopped eating. Some refused to sleep. And some, like little Josephine, age 9, vanished completely during the night, though the doors were locked from the inside. Father Benedict would say, "She's gone to heaven. Be not afraid." But the staff knew better. They started keeping journals. Tracking patterns. By the end of the year, 31 children had ascended, and not one body was ever found. A traveling priest finally arrived to evaluate the orphanage. He stayed one night. By morning, he was blind, his eyes clouded white like smoke. He never spoke again. And yet, in the asylum where he spent his last days, he would scratch one word into the walls over and over with his fingernail, Abrasax. The name of an ancient Gnostic demon god. Half man, half snake. The gatekeeper between worlds. And when investigators finally stormed Father Benedict's chambers in the winter of 1890, they found no bed. No food. Only candles, arranged in spirals around a pit carved into the stone floor. Inside the pit, dolls. Hundreds of them. Each dressed in real orphan clothing. Each face twisted into a scream. Father Benedict was never seen again. But the nightmares? They never stopped. To this day, hikers near the ruins of that orphanage report hearing children crying, and a voice whispering Latin through the trees. Some say it's a ghost. Others say it's the same man, still keeping his rituals alive. Because evil doesn't retire. It just changes names. And it always wants more children. Winter hit Mississippi hard in January of 1890. A sudden frost choked the trees. The sky turned an unnatural yellow. And inside the St. Elora orphanage, reality began to bend. It started with the wallpaper. At first, the nuns thought it was mold, dark spots appearing in the shape of hands, pressing outward from behind the walls. But when they tried to scrub it, the stains pulsed, like veins. Nurse Abigail, the most skeptical of the staff, ran her hand across the nursery wall to prove it was harmless. The wall exhaled. And something inside it whispered her name. That night, she locked herself in the linen closet and screamed for hours. When they finally broke down the door, all they found were her shoes, still warm, and long drag marks on the wood floor, leading into the wall. And then came the howling. Not from the wind, but from beneath the floorboards. At exactly 2:03 a.m. Each night, for 7 consecutive nights, the children heard what they described as a woman sobbing, followed by something laughing with a voice made of broken glass. The youngest orphan, a mute boy named Caleb, began drawing symbols on every surface, using his own blood. The same symbols found in Father Benedict's black book. And every time someone tried to paint over them, the symbols would reappear before the paint dried. The headmistress tried to send letters for help. They never arrived. Because the postman went missing on the 3rd day. The same day every mirror in the orphanage cracked, from the inside out. Soon, the children refused to stay indoors. They begged to sleep in the garden, even in freezing rain. One child said, "It's safer with the worms." And then came the final sign. The portrait of Saint Elora, hanging in the main hall since the day the orphanage opened, began to bleed from the eyes. Every hour, on the hour. And the blood? It matched the blood types of the missing children. Still, the church denied involvement. Still, the town looked away. And inside those cursed halls, the air grew thick with whispers, hundreds of voices overlapping, murmuring prayers that had never belonged to any religion known to man. By the time the state dispatched a team of inspectors, no one was left alive. Only the walls remained. And they were still breathing. To this day, locals warn travelers never to go near the remains after dark. Not because of ghosts, they say, but because the orphanage is still alive. Still hungry. And it remembers the names of everyone who ever ignored the screams. When the inspectors arrived at St. Alora's in late January 1890, the silence was overwhelming. No birds. No wind. Not even the creak of the century-old trees that surrounded the property like sentinels. Just a dead, choking stillness that made the air taste like rust. The front door stood open, swinging slowly on its hinges, as if inviting them in. Inside, there was no sign of struggle. No overturned furniture. No shattered glass. Just rows of neatly made beds, and children's shoes lined up at the foot of each one. Too many shoes. More than the number of registered orphans. In the chapel, the crucifix had fallen from the altar. Not broken, but bent, as if something immense had tried to twist it into a knot. Then came the discovery under the bell tower. One of the inspectors, a man named Howard Briggs, noticed something odd. The ground beneath the bell had a strange, concave dent, like something had been dropped from a great height. And the soil was warm to the touch. They began to dig. And only 6 inches down, their shovels struck wood. A trapdoor. Sealed shut with 6 rusted iron nails, each one engraved with the Latin word divovio. I curse. They pried it open, and the smell hit them like a wall, sweet, rotting, and ancient. Not just death. Something older. Something sealed away. Below was a spiral staircase, descending into pitch blackness. The stone walls were covered in carvings, some biblical, others, not. At the bottom, they found the hidden chamber. A room lined with bones. Some human. Some too large to be. In the center was a stone altar with restraints bolted into the surface, and a leather-bound book open to a page written in both Latin and a language no one could identify. Briggs, unable to stop himself, read the Latin aloud. In nomine filii, claudo portus sed per claves vestre culpi, recluditor. In the name of the Son, I close the gates, but by the keys of your sin, they shall reopen. The bell above began to ring. On its own. 13 times. And from the corners of the room, the shadows began to move, not flicker, not stretch, move. The inspectors ran. Only Briggs made it back to the surface. And by the time he emerged, the other 5 were gone. Not dead. Erased. No names. No records. No birth certificates. As if they had never existed. Briggs was committed to an asylum 3 days later, raving about children with eyeless faces and the sound of bells that only rang when someone was about to disappear. The bell tower was sealed. The trapdoor buried again. But according to recent drone footage from urban explorers, the ground beneath the tower is rising, slowly, inch by inch. Like something underneath is pushing upward. Something, waking up, they thought they'd buried the past. But the past doesn't stay buried when it was never meant to be seen by the living. In 1936, nearly half a century after St. Alora's was abandoned, a pair of WPA archivists were sent to clean out the remains of the county courthouse in Tala County, Mississippi. One of them, a woman named Loretta Wills, found a fire-damaged cabinet with a scorched, broken lock. Inside were records the state claimed had been destroyed in the flood of 1904. But Loretta found them. A leather ledger, soaked through with mildew and something darker, something sticky. Across the front, the words, Final Log, St. Elora Home for the Innocent, 1889. Inside was a list. Names. Dates of birth. Dates of death. Every child who entered that orphanage. But not a single child had a date of death, just a final column labeled, Harvested. Some dates had a small sigil beside them. A crooked, star-shaped symbol etched so hard into the parchment it pierced through the pages beneath. Loretta took the book home with her. She told her supervisor she found nothing. And for months, she studied it in secret. Then, in her final journal entry, dated July 12, 1937, she wrote, "They weren't children by the time they left the basement. They weren't anything anymore. And they never left. They were fed into something older. Something that fed back." The next day, Loretta Wills was found in her attic, hanging by a belt made of interwoven rosaries. Around her body were 7 circles drawn in ash. Not random, deliberate. As if she were trying to protect herself, or contain something that had already gotten out. The ledger vanished from police custody that very night. No evidence. No case file. Not even the coroner's report remained. But in 2012, a collector of haunted relics posted anonymously on an underground forum. He claimed to possess a book wrapped in children's burial shrouds, bound with a lock that screams when touched. The book matched the description of Loretta's ledger. He said he bought it from a man in Mississippi. A man who didn't want money. He just wanted the book to be gone. The collector kept it in a glass case, until the glass cracked from the inside. He wrote only one more post, "The ink is moving. It's rewriting the names. I think it just added mine." Since that post, no one has heard from him. The account went dark. And the book? No one knows where it is now. But 3 people who replied to that forum thread were found dead in the same week. All with torn-out pages stuffed in their mouths. Pages that were never printed, but handwritten, in the same ink that bled through St. Elora's ledger. Ink that smelled like oil. In 1954, deep in the rural stretch of forest that once shadowed St. Elora's ruins, a group of teenagers dared each other to go exploring. They'd heard the stories. Everyone in Mississippi had. That the ground still felt warm near the old foundation. That the trees grew sideways near the orphanage site, twisting as if pulled toward something underground. But teenagers are brave when they don't believe they'll ever die. So they went. They found the broken stone steps, moss-eaten and half-swallowed by roots. They found what was left of the altar, a cracked marble slab still marked with the faint outline of a handprint. Burned in, as if scorched by fire, or acid. But what made them run wasn't the ruins. It was the screaming. A high, sharp wail, like a child begging for its life, but with no breath, no pause, no throat. It didn't echo. It just pierced. The sound came from beneath them. From a hole, covered in rotted boards. One boy, Jameson Kirk, knelt and looked inside. He saw eyes. Too many to count. Blinking in perfect silence. And then the voice spoke. Not in a child's tone, but in the voice of every child who'd ever died there. All speaking at once. All saying the same thing. We told you not to look. Now we can see you, too. Jameson ran, but not fast enough. They found him days later at his home, sitting in a filled bathtub. His skin was intact, but his face had been clawed with tiny scratches, as if from dozens of small hands. His eyes were missing, yet there was no blood. Just a message, carved into the condensation of the bathroom mirror, he saw. So now we sing. From that night on, every full moon, the screaming returned. Not at the ruins, but from the bathtub in Jameson's house. Neighbors heard it. Police heard it. But when they entered, the tub was empty. And wet. always wet. Until 1971, when a new family moved in. The youngest child, Amelia, 6 years old, was found humming a song she claimed she learned from the girl in the drain. The lyrics? Children cry when they are fed and whisper secrets, for the dead eyes that see must give them back, or hear the hands that scratch and scratch. The girl vanished weeks later. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Just a filled tub. And a tiny handprint in the fogged mirror. But this time, it was still warm. There was one thing the townsfolk of Elkins County never talked about. Not in church. Not in whispers. Not even when dying. What they buried beneath St. Elora. Not the children. Not the nuns. But the box. Buried in 1889 by the last priest to ever walk out of that orphanage alive. Father Harlan Drew. His journal, discovered a century later in a secret compartment of the town library, was soaked with blood and written entirely in Latin. One passage was translated by a scholar who later gouged out her own eyes with her fingernails. That passage said, "In the year of grief, we did as was foretold. We opened the gate. But it was not heaven that came for the children. It was what comes before the end of language. We tried to shut it. We built the box. But the box must never be opened, or the choir will rise again." The choir. A name whispered in other missing child cases across the South. A name carved into oak trees near graves with no bodies. They say it wasn't just a box of wood. They say it was made from the bones of the first 7 children taken, bleached and bound with sacred iron, etched with symbols that predate Christianity, even Rome. Inside that box? The tongues. Still moving. Still wet. Still singing. And wherever the box went, death followed. That's why they buried it deep beneath St. Elora. Beneath layers of rock and salt and holy ground. But the earthquake of 1942 split that ground open. And what was sealed, began to leak. Not physically. Psychically. Children started sleepwalking miles from their homes. Mothers found their babies humming tunes they'd never heard. And animals, hundreds of them, died in circles, surrounding churches with their bodies facing in. The church tried to cover it up. They burned St. Elora to the ground. But they didn't find the box. Because it had already moved. Now, believers and skeptics alike speak of the singing box as a cursed artifact. Some say it's in a museum in Europe, mislabeled as a medieval reliquary. Others claim it was buried again, deeper, beneath a school, a prison, or a hospital. And some say it's not a box at all anymore. That it's a voice. A frequency that infects dreams, speaks through static, or hums beneath the notes of your favorite lullaby. So if you ever hear children singing where there are no children. If you feel a warmth rising from the ground. If the mirror fogs and doesn't clear, walk away. Don't hum back. Don't knock twice. And never, never, look beneath the tub. Because St. Elora is gone. But the silence it broke.